Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 5 of my podcast, Book and Story World with author Priya Grewal. So thank you to everyone who tunes into my podcast show. Much appreciated. So for Season 2, Episode 5, I've decided to read aloud one of the books in my Monster World book series. So I've read the first one, The Red Diamond, the third one, Gargoyle's Servant. So today I'm going to read the second book in the series, Monster World Book 2, Nuisance to the Witches. And on the cover, the subtitle is A Menace to the Village. So along with the rest of my self-published collection, all my books are available to purchase on Amazon in paperback or on Kindle. Okay, so let's dig in. Monster World Book 2, Nuisance to the Witches by myself, Priya Grewal. Chapter 1. Horatio lifted her broomstick out of the rack in her cottage and happily exited her cottage to attend the witches' annual broomstick race. 5 years had passed since the witches and the elders from the human planet had banished the demon monsters Sarkwell and Dekrov to an underground prison for trying to enslave the human and monster races into worshipping them all for all of eternity with the red diamond they had found. The red diamond was an artifact said to hold the power of all the gods. The pair of demon monsters had found it and forcibly forced every individual into worshipping them, and if anyone refused, then they would torture each individual with slavery. Horatio had managed to gather all the witches and made a secret alliance with the elders on the human planet. The witches and elders had enough magic between them to take the red diamond from Sarkwell and Dekrov and imprison them forever. The universe was restored, and the human world and monster world had coexisted peacefully ever since. The red diamond was hidden away to never be found, with the witches and elders sealing it away forever magically. Horatio had continued having a fun existence ever since the pair of demons had been imprisoned away with no magic to release them. She had enjoyed life immensely since. Horatio smiled as she got close to the field used for the witches' annual broomstick race. A few of the witches turned around and greeted her as she made her way to the participants area. There was great music playing which filled the air and magical fires reaching the sky. Horatio had signed up earlier in the year to participate in the event. She walked over to sign in for the event. Horatio said good luck to the other witches as the organizer, a witch called Slevlak, told everyone participating to get in their starting positions. Horatio took her place behind the line marked out on the grass for the witches to stand behind. "Mount your broom," Slevlak shouted, her voice amplified by magic. The witches in the audience had formed a great circle around the race area. A stadium full of seats had also been magicked up. Horatio excitedly mounted her broom, heart filling with anticipation. "On your marks, get, set, go," roared Slevlak. Horatio commanded her broom to move. The broom began to sail higher and higher up into the air, and when Horatio's head was nearly touching the clouds above, Horatio commanded her broom to move at full speed. "Full speed, broom," Horatio commanded. The wind swept past Horatio's face as she urged her broom to move faster and faster. She sped ahead of many of the other contestants. She was approaching the front of the competition with only 3 witches in front of her. "Faster, broom," Horatio commanded. Horatio's broom surged ahead. She overtook 2 of the contestants. She saw the one remaining contestant in front of her glance behind her at Horatio. The witch, a red-faced witch called Javain, was the only competitor in front of Horatio now. Javain had won the previous year too. Horatio gritted her teeth against the wind, urging her broom to go faster. Horatio was almost level with Javain. "Come on," Horatio thought to herself as the finishing line came into sight. Horatio was almost completely level with Javain. Horatio flying above Javain. The 2 witches were almost neck and neck. Javane's broom crossed the finishing line with Horatio only a split second behind her. Horatio crossed the finishing line. She came to a halt on her broom. The witches below were cheering. "Better luck next time," Javane said jovially, grinning as she paused on her broom to talk to Horatio. "It was really close, though," Javane said, and flew away on her broom, heading towards the ground. "Ah," Horatio exclaimed. Horatio was still happy she didn't take not winning hard. It was fun to compete in the race. She knew that Javane had won because she practiced so hard for the race. Horatio couldn't be bothered to practice flying at a great speed as much as Javane, but practiced more than the witches behind her. "Maybe I'll try to practice more than Javane to win next year," Horatio thought to herself. "Second place isn't too bad," she mused to herself. Horatio began flying on her broom towards the ground to collect her reward for coming second place. Chapter 2. Horatio walked back to her cottage carrying her second place reward, which was a statue of a broomstick, which said second place on it. Horatio enjoyed being presented the trophy in front of all the other witches. She felt immensely proud of herself. It was now night time and the stars were shining in the night sky. Horatio magicked her door open when she reached her cottage. She closed the door behind her. She happily placed her broomstick trophy on her mantelpiece above her living room fireplace. An open chest of drawers caught Horatio's eye. Horatio frowned. She walked up to the chest of drawers to find the drawer empty. Horatio gasped. "Who has taken my jewels?" Horatio cried. Everything that Horatio had been given to her as a trade for access to limited magical powers by the other monsters on Monster World had gone missing. Her drawer had been full of magnificent necklaces, rings, bracelets, and more. Her favorite pair of earrings had also been stolen. The witches had decided some time ago to have a business of passing on magical powers to monsters if they gave them something in return. Horatio had always loved all the jewelry she had been given. She loved her jewels. Horatio checked the rest of her cottage for any sign of disturbance. Everything else was in its rightful place. There was just the empty chest of drawers. Who would do this? Horatio asked herself. Who would mess with us witches when we have magical powers? Horatio asked herself out loud. Horatio decided she would use magic to try and see who took the jewelry. She conjured an image in front of her, commanding her magic to show her who had stolen the jewelry. Who was the thief? As Horatio waited to discover who the thief was so she could exact revenge, the bubble in front of her turned black. Her magic had nothing to show her. Horatio gasped. The culprit had blocked himself or herself from being seen. That means the culprit had access to magic so no one would find out who the thief was. Horatio stomped furiously out of her cottage. "Witches!" she shouted, amplifying her voice so every witch could hear her. Horatio waited as each witch in the village left her cottage to join her on the street. "What's wrong?" Slevlak asked. Slevlak was in her nightclothes. She rubbed her eyes. It looked like she had been disrupted from going to sleep. The other witches stood around Horatio looking curious. Someone, Horatio spat. Someone has stolen my jewelry that I had given to me by monsters for some magic in return. "Oh no," Javane said, still holding her broomstick, her first place medal still around her neck. "I used magic to show me who did it, but the person blocked themselves from being seen with magic somehow," Horatio spluttered. "I can't discover who did it." "Well, it can't have been anyone here," Slevlak said. "We all have our own jewels from trading. Why would any of us need to steal anything?" There was a murmur of agreement around the circle of witches. "I'm not accusing anybody here," Horatio insisted. "I'm at a loss for what I can do with the thief blocking themselves from being seen with magic somehow." "Everyone try and see who the thief is with their magic," Slevlak ordered the rest. There were murmurs of confusion as the bubble to see the past in front of every witch just showed a black bubble. "See," Horatio spluttered. "Like I said." A witch with a blue face called Elezra stepped forward. "This is indeed very strange," Elezra announced to all. "As we can't see who the thief is with magic, there is no point trying to do any more now. It's night time and I'm sure everyone wants to relax in their cottage. Let's reconvene here tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a group meeting to see what can be done about this strange happening, Elezra ordered. Javain patted Horenio on the back comfortingly. Don't worry, Javain said. We'll try and get to the bottom of it tomorrow. She walked back towards her cottage. Sorry nothing more can be done tonight, Elezra said to Horenio with Slavlak standing next to her still. We'll try and come up with a way to discover who the thief is tomorrow. Good night, Elezra said, walking away a moment later. Slavlak smiled compassionately to Horenio and headed back towards her cottage. Humph, Horenio said, feeling disgruntled. She walked back into her cottage and shut the door. She put a spell on the door to make sure it was shut firmly and that no one could get in. She attached a bell to her door and window so she would be notified if anyone did manage to get into her cottage again. She trotted upstairs to her bedroom, deciding to leave the light on so she didn't wake up creeped out in the middle of the night. Chapter 3. The next morning, Horenio had her breakfast and boiled some water in a kettle so that she could have a cup of tea. She poured the hot water into a mug and put some milk and sugar in it. Horenio sat on her sofa by her fireplace pondering who the thief could be. She tried to think whether she had made any enemies over the years. Nothing came to mind. She got on well with all the other witches, and the only dealings she had with monsters outside of the witches' village was trading a little bit of magic for jewels most of the time. Horenio continued staring into the fire, her mug clasped in her hands. When it was 1 p.m., Horenio left her cottage to reconvene with the witches. Horenio stood outside her cottage, murmuring welcome to the other witches. Javain arrived a moment later, smiling brightly. How are you feeling this morning, Horenio? Javain asked sympathetically. Well, I managed to get some sleep, Horenio replied. But I've been trying to work out who has a grudge against me. To do this, Horenio asked. A grudge? Javain asked. You don't think it was just someone after your jewelry? Javain questioned, eyebrows raised. No, replied Horenio. Are monsters from the other villages really going to be that bothered about stealing jewelry and risking our wrath when we have our magic to scare them? Horenio asked. Javain replied. That's something to consider. Horenio turned her head to see Elezra stomping angrily towards them. She was followed by Slavlak, who looked extremely concerned. What's wrong? Horenio asked worriedly, not used to seeing Elezra not in her usual calm mood. Elezra had some leaves in her hand and what looked like a part of a green shrub. She amplified her voice magically for all the witches standing in the circle to hear. Someone, Elezra shouted, someone has destroyed the shrubs in front of my house. They left the destroyed mess there too, Elezra roared. There were gasps and worried looks around the circle of witches. Someone is messing with us, Elezra roared furiously, raising her fist in the air. Do you think it was the same person who stole my jewelry? Asked Horenio, eyes widening. Yes, spat Elezra. It must be. There is no such thing as coincidences. There was another murmur of agreement around the circle of witches. Okay, Slavlak said, looking around the circle. So, we're agreed. We all think the same culprit stole Horenio's jewelry and destroyed Elezra's shrubs in front of her cottage, Slavlak asked the circle of witches. The circle of witches all started responding with a yes. Anyone have any ideas who might have a grudge against us all? Horenio asked the entire circle. There were murmurs and headshakes, none of the witches coming up with any suggestions. Well, we're agreed it is no one here, as said last night, Slavlak said, as we all have our own jewels and jewelry from trading, so it doesn't make any sense. So, it could be a monster from another village. What would his or her grudge be? There was a silence amongst the witches. A moment later, an orange-faced witch named Gladov waved her hand in the air. Everyone turned to look at her. Speak, Slavlak said to Gladov, Elezra still looking furious about her shrubs. Well, what if we made a big name for ourselves in Monster World without trading a little magic for jewels and whatever else we're offered, Gladov suggested. What if a monster got jealous of us becoming a big deal in Monster World, and that's what the grudge is, Gladov suggested. The witches started speaking amongst themselves. Horenio considered the suggestion. Makes sense to me, Horenio agreed, after pondering on the suggestion for a moment. Monster World is massive, Elezra complained. How are we going to find out which monster it is behind the 2 crimes, Elezra questioned. Well, let's think for a moment, Slavlak intervened. The culprit has acquired magic from somewhere to shield themselves from being seen. That means the only way to catch the monster is to set a trap for this evening. I don't think the culprit would dare do anything in the day, Slavlak instructed them all. What trap do we set? Asked Elezra. Herenio pondered. If we're all in our cottages by 6 p.m. this evening, we could set an alarm to go off if an intruder who isn't a witch comes into the village, Herenio suggested. Then we could set up a net using magic to catch the monster automatically as soon as the alarm goes off. Sounds good, Elezra said determinedly. Everyone in agreement to be in their cottages by 6 p.m. and is everyone happy with the plan? Slavlak asked all the witches. The circle of witches said yes and nodded their heads. Right, Elezra said, turning to Herenio. Let's set that trap. Chapter 4. Herenio sat on her sofa by her fireplace waiting for the clock to strike 6. Herself, Elezra and Slavlak had set up the alarm and net to capture the monster who had stolen Herenio's jewelry and destroyed Elezra's shrubs. Herenio waited nervously. The clock struck 6 p.m. Elezra stared at her clock as it chimed to let her know it was 6 p.m. Here we go, Herenio muttered to herself. She had closed her curtains too, as had all the witches, so the monster who was behind the crimes would feel confident about coming into the village. Herenio stared at her clock for the next half an hour. She was getting more and more fidgety, waiting for something to happen. All of a sudden, as the clock struck 6:30 p.m., the loud alarm sounded, the noise reaching every witch in her cottage. Herenio abruptly left her seat and exited her cottage to have a look at the monster who had been captured. Herenio rushed over to the net, which was at the centre of the village. Herenio looked at the net in dismay. What? Herenio murmured to herself as she stared at the net. The other witches had arrived and were gathered around the net as well, all of them looking dismayed. The net had 5 grey rocks in it. Herenio glanced up to see Elezra staring at the rocks and looking furious. Slavlak briefly put her arm around Herenio comfortingly. How is this possible? Slavlak asked with a confused look on her face. It means that the monster has access to magic somehow and foresaw that we had set a trap and magic some grey rocks in the net instead. He or she is probably laughing at us as we speak, Elezra exclaimed furiously. There's only 2 ways for a monster to obtain magic, Gladov chirped in cleverly. The only 2 sources in the universe that can give out magic is ourselves, the witches, or the elders from the human planet who we worked with in the past to imprison Dekrov and Sarkor, Gladov added. Everyone was silent for a moment. Well, no one here would give out magic to do this, Javain piped up. There isn't a motive. This could lead to war with the elders if it continues, Elezra added in. Now, Slavlak said calmly. It doesn't mean the elders knew what the magic the monster used to conceal themselves was for. The monster could have bribed one of the elders, and the elders didn't ask any questions, Slavlak added. There were murmurs around the circle of witches, all looking confused. Next, the sound of glass tinkling reached the ears of the witches. What was that? Slavlak inquired abruptly. Elezra frowned. Show us, Elezra commanded her magic. A large purple arrow protruded from Elezra's finger and showed the witches which direction to walk in. The witches all began walking as a crowd in the direction the arrow pointed them to. They suddenly came to a halt in front of Slavlak's cottage. All of the witches gasped. Slavlak pushed her way to the front of the crowd. What is this? Slavlak roared. Slavlak's window had been smashed with a rock. The rock could be seen on the other side of the window in Slavlak's living room. Herenio returned Slavlak's comfort by tapping her on the back briefly. The monster was here, Elezra said dramatically. He or she went to smash the windows as we looked at the net, Elezra added in. Show yourself, Herenio shouted. Nothing happened. The witches all looked scared. I won't rest, Slavlak said, until we have caught the culprit. He or she will not get away with terrorizing our village, Slavlak pledged. A short while later, all the witches had agreed to pair up and stay at one another's cottage for the night, so no witch was by herself. They all felt uneasy staying in their cottages by themselves with the terrorizing monster out there somewhere. Herenio had paired up with Elezra. The pair walked solemnly back to Herenio's cottage. "I don't like this," Elezra said to Herenio. "I don't like this one bit. Feeling gripped with fear for the evening with a monster out there somewhere with a grudge against us," Elezra confided. "I know," Herenio agreed. "We're going to have to come up with something to deal with this monster." Chapter 5. Elezra and Herenio were sat on the sofas around the fireplace in Herenio's cottage. Both of them clasped mugs of tea in their hands. It was around 9 p.m. "What can we do to trap the monster for real this time?" Elezra asked Herenio. "There's no point setting up a plan with all the witches, as the monster can look in and see what we're doing using magic," Elezra complained. Herenio pondered for a moment. "Let's block ourselves from being seen with magic so no one can look in on us either." "Okay," Elezra responded more brightly. "And then?" Herenio pondered again. "Then we can go outside invisibly and set the same trap again, this time without him or her knowing," Herenio suggested. "Good plan," Elezra exclaimed enthusiastically. "Let's do it," Elezra exclaimed. Both witches briefly started chanting so that no one could look into their conversation using magic. They cast a spell so that anyone looking in magically would see an alternative conversation, with the pair merely sitting on the sofas for the evening, as opposed to copying the black bubble the monster used, which might arouse suspicion of them planning anything. "Okay, the spell is cast," Herenio said. "We have our cover." "Now what?" Elezra asked Herenio. "Let's turn invisible and go outside. I'll make it so no one can see the door open." Herenio quickly started chanting a spell again. Herenio and Elezra both made themselves invisible. They walked over to the door and opened it. Due to Herenio's magic, anyone watching wouldn't see the door open to become suspicious. Herenio and Elezra both started chanting in their heads to reset the same trap with an alarm and net again. "Now, let's wait," Herenio said to Elezra telepathically, not wanting to make a sound. The pair of witches waited in the dark, their insides filling with anticipation and some fear. Nothing happened for a while. "I'm going to cast a spell so that the net turns any invisible entity visible for us to see," Herenio told Elezra telepathically. "Good thinking," Elezra replied back. Herenio silently commanded the net to turn any intruder caught visible in case the monster too was invisible. Herenio and Elezra waited and waited in silence. It was nearing midnight. Suddenly, at 1:45, the alarm was set off and it could be loudly heard across the village, waking up many of the sleeping witches. Herenio gasped. "Let's go," she said to Elezra. Herenio and Elezra rushed over to where they had placed the net near the center of the village. Herenio's eyes widened in dismay again as they reached the net and saw a horrible-looking monster demon with large horns and large fangs protruding from his mouth. He also had a third eye in his forehead. Herenio amplified her voice in triumph. "We have caught the monster," Herenio shouted victoriously for all to hear. "Yes," Elezra shouted happily. The other witches began to gather around the net with the monster in. He had some golden goblets and plates in his hands. Gladov made her way to the front of the crowd. "Hey," Gladov shouted, "those are mine." Gladov magically slapped the monster without physically touching him. "Ow," the monster growled. "Get me out of this net," the monster roared. "I forgot to cast a spell on my door to keep intruders out," Gladov told them all. "I went to bed. He must have snuck in then." "Maybe he used magic on you to forget," Herenio said. "He must have been able to teleport in as he didn't set off the alarm on the way in," Herenio said. "Who are you?" Elezra shouted at the monster demon. "What is your name?" Elezra asked the monster demon. The monster demon growled unhappily. "My name is Rosro," the monster demon said, knowing there was no point in lying as he had been caught. "Which village are you from?" Herenio asked the monster demon. "I'm of the horned folk demon species," the monster demon replied, with extra eyes. "And why have you been terrorizing our village, stealing, smashing windows, and destroying shrubs?" asked Herenio. "Because I felt like it," the monster demon replied. Herenio waved her hands and green magic left her hands, raising the monster demon Rosro high into the air. I hope you know there's no way of you leaving the net, Horenio told Rosro. Now, where did you get the magic from? Who provided you with the magic? Horenio demanded to know. The monster demon fell silent. Tell me, Horenio roared again. The other witches looked at the scene, eyes wide. I don't know, Rosro responded. Whenever I try to remember, my mind goes blank. Horenio turned to look at Elezra in exasperation. I'll be back in a moment, Elezra whispered to Horenio, leaving the circle and walking away. Why have you been terrorizing us? Horenio demanded to know. Because I felt like it, Rosro responded again. What grudge do you have? Gladov shouted to the monster. The monster Rosro grinned, not saying anything. Gladov sent a magical slap to the monster again. His face whipped around for a moment in response to the slap. Ow! Rosro shouted to Gladov. Wait until I get out of here, he roared. You're not getting out of the net, Horenio told the monster. Rosro fell silent. He started grinning at the witches again. Wipe that grin off your face, Slavlak ordered. You've been caught. That's right, Javain added in. The monster looked at Javain and then looked away, still looking mischievous. The witches watched the monster in silence for a few moments, deciding what they should do with him. A few moments later, Elezra returned. I have to tell everyone something, Elezra whispered into Horenio's ear. What is it? Horenio asked, furrowing her eyebrows in confusion. Elezra made her way to the centre of the circle, standing next to the monster demon Rosro in his net. There is a traitor among us, roared Elezra. A witch here in our village is in league with this monster demon and is in partnership with himself to afflict our village with these crimes and terror, Elezra told the shocked circle. Elezra looked furious. And that traitor is? Elezra shouted. Javain. The witches all gasped and one by one turned to look at Javain, who was leaving the front of the circle, trying to get to the back. Traitor! Slavluk screamed, pointing to Javain. Javain stopped in her tracks, turning to face the circle. Chapter 6. Horenio gasped as shocked as the other witches. Elezra quickly clicked her fingers and Javain was caught in a net. Elezra then levitated the net with Javain inside of it, so she was hanging in the air like Rosro. There, Elezra shouted to Javain. Now you can't use magic to escape. Javain said nothing and stared furiously at Elezra, her eyes beginning to show malice. Elezra turned to address the circle of witches. I got suspicious, Elezra told the other witches. How could the monster have known we were setting up a trap and put rocks in the net himself? Someone must have told him. Someone who is probably on the inside. It didn't make sense for the elders to have a grudge against us to give a monster that much magic to teleport in and turn invisible. I felt suspicious of there being a traitor as I sat in Horenio's cottage this evening, thinking to myself, Elezra stated. I didn't want to say anything without having proof. The thought newly formed in my mind, Elezra explained. And obviously I didn't know who to trust at that point with telling them anything. The witches stared at Elezra in silence, looking shocked. So, I slipped away just now. Javain had blocked her and the monster from being seen with magic. So I looked for a loophole as the same black bubble came up when I tried to find out who Rosro was working with, Elezra asked. Instead, I asked my magic to show me who in the village was friends with Rosro, and it showed me Javain. Everyone gasped again in the circle of witches. Rosro looked solemn in his net for the first time. I wanted more proof, so I went to Javain's cottage where she had left the door open, and I found this. Elezra reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a silver necklace with a red ruby and Horenio's favourite pair of earrings. That's some of the jewellery that was stolen from me, Horenio exclaimed in shock. We split it between us both, Rosro the monster said, as if you were finding it all amusing. She put magic on Rosro so he couldn't mention her name just in case he was ever caught, Elezra told the crowd. Elezra zapped Rosro with some magic, undoing Javain's spell. Oh yeah, Rosro finally said. Javain told me to do it. Shut it, Javain roared. I'm going to zap him again to tell us the whole truth, Elezra told the other witches. Elezra zapped the monster demon again. Basically, Rosro began, I visited Javain, who I had been friendly with in the past. She had given me some magic to grow some horrible-looking mushrooms around a monster's cottage whom I didn't like. He beat me once in a race, Rosro told them all. I decided to visit Javain after I had grown the mushrooms and watched the monster look all bewildered, Rosro told them all. I thought she would find it funny when I told her to look at the scene magically. The witches stared at Rosro, listening to every word. He seemed to enjoy them hanging off his every word for a moment. And then, after grinning mischievously, Rosro told them all, Javain told me she was jealous of some of the witches here. She said that she had won the annual Witches' Broomstick race last year and would probably win this year too with practicing, but didn't get the respect that other witches here had, Rosro told them all. She said she was jealous of Herenio, Elezra, Slavlak, and Gladov for the respect that they had from the other witches. She was jealous because she didn't seem to get the same kind of respect. She said she just gloated a lot about winning and became less popular that way. So, she wanted me to come in here and cause mischief and steal from you and break windows, as she would get a power trip from it all, with you other witches being more respected and well-liked than herself. She convinced me by saying I would be invisible and there was no way to be caught because she was going to use magic to conceal ourselves, so none of you could check who the culprit was. So, I stole from Herenio, destroyed Elezra's shrubs, smashed Levluck's window, and Javain put magic on Gladov to forget to seal her door magically. And I stole those goblets from her too. I can't believe I got caught, Rosra told them all. The witches stared at Rosra and Javain in shocked silence. My motive, Rosra declared to the witches, was jealousy. I was jealous of the name you witches were making for yourself from trading magic for jewels, etc., so I said yes to doing this. I want to be respected and have a name like you all have, Rosra declared. Rosra fell silent, finishing his revelation. Elezra looked at Javain. Is this all true? Elezra asked Javain. Well, obviously it is. I zapped him to tell us the whole truth, Elezra answered her own question. Javain's eyes gleamed with complete malice now. Yes, it's true, she spluttered. I was sick of you all getting respect and everyone liking you all and always speaking respectfully about yourselves. No one cared about me after winning the witches' annual broomstick race. The attention you all got should have been mine. I barely had any friends left from gloating about it, Javain confessed. So, I just thought I'd have a little fun with you all. Rosro here likes getting up to mischief, so I thought I'd ask him. He said he was jealous of the reputation of the witches in Monster World, so gladly agreed to do the crimes I made up for him to do, Javain confessed to them all. Nearly got away with it all too, Javain spluttered, nothing but malice in her eyes. The witches fell silent. You're a coward and a traitor, Elezra shouted to Javain. The rest of the witches started cheering and jeering. Okay, Herenio addressed all the witches, calling for silence. Let us gather together away from these two and decide what we want to do with them. They can't leave their nets, Herenio told them all. The witches all left the circle to decide what to do with the pair together. Herenio walked to join them, shocked at the betrayal and at having a traitor amongst their midst who wished harm on them all. Chapter 7. The witches reached a verdict and gathered again around the nets with the criminal pair inside of them. The witches had asked Herenio to declare the verdict to the pair of criminals. For your malice and betrayal against us all, Herenio declared to the two criminals, you, Javain, will be banished from our village to live by yourself in another dimension. You will not be allowed to inflict us with any more harm. You are a truly dreadful and horrible being, and it will be a happier village and world without you in it, Herenio told Javain. No, Javain screamed. I don't want to live alone forever. I'm sorry, she pleaded. He lied. He made me do it. I swear, Javain pleaded. And you will be stripped of your magical powers, Herenio told Javain. Herenio began draining Javain of her magic using her own magic. No, please, Javain screeched in her net. Elezra smiled victoriously at Javain. Slevlak, would you do the honours, please? Elezra asked. Sure, Slevlak replied, getting her hands ready. Slevlak began to open a big circular portal in the air. A vortex span within the circular portal. Bye-bye, Elezra shouted happily. With her magic, Elezra pushed Javain into the circular portal, and it closed up a split second later, sealing Javain the traitor away forever. Good riddance to bad rubbish, Elezra said happily. The witches in the circle all started clapping and cheering. As for you, Horenio said sternly, turning to address Rosro, you will be given the same punishment. Sent to another dimension to live by yourself forever with no access to magic, of course, Horenio told the criminal monster. No, shouted Rosro, not by myself forever. Please, I'll do anything, Rosro begged. And again, please, Slavlak, Horenio requested. Slavlak lifted her hands in the air and opened another circular portal with a vortex spinning on the inside. Off you go, Rosro, Elezra exclaimed happily, lifting her hands and magically pushing Rosro into the empty dimension to live by himself forever. The portal sealed itself closed a moment later. A split second later, the witches all started cheering. The criminals were caught and disposed of. Their village was at peace again. The witches all lifted Horenio and Elezra onto their shoulders, celebrating themselves for catching the culprit. Horenio was lifted up in celebration for setting the trap again, and Elezra was lifted in celebration for discovering that Javain was the traitor in their midst, and even that there was a traitor at all. The witches carried the pair and set off fireworks in the air to celebrate the demise of the criminals. The witches' village was at peace again. Chapter 8. Horenio sat on her favourite seat by her fireplace that evening, sipping tea happily. She rested her head back on the seat and said, back to normal at last. Horenio closed her eyes for a moment happily and then reached out her hands to warm herself with the lit fire in her fireplace. The end. Okay, everyone. I hope you enjoyed my story. Monster World Book 2, Nuisance to the Witches. So I hope everyone enjoyed that. And that concludes Season 2, Episode 5 of my podcast, Book and Story World with author Priya Grewal. I hope everyone has a fabulous day and a fabulous week. Take care. Until next time. See you.